Hi, everyone. Welcome to Smartling's October webinar. I am Cassie Thompson, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Smartling. And today I'm joined by two great guests who will be talking all about how to measure, communicate, and prove localization ROI. So the goal here is really to help teams from going as being seen as a cost center to instead being seen as a value driver, which is super important. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. One, please put any questions you have in the questions tab. We'll try to get to them at the end, time permitting. And then the second is that we will be recording the entire session. So if for any reason you need to leave or step out for a moment, you can catch up on what you missed later. So let's get into it. Like I mentioned, I'm joined by two excellent speakers, Kevin O'Donnell, who is the founder of Global10x, a consultancy that helps B2B companies grow internationally, and Smartling's Director of Customer Success, Ryan Soos. So welcome, Kevin and Ryan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Cassie.
Thanks, Cassie.
Awesome. Well, let's get started kind of setting up the problem. Kevin, in your experience working with localization teams and companies who are trying to expand internationally, why are teams finding it so difficult to prove localization ROI at all?
Yeah, it's a good question, Cassie. I think a lot of it comes down to expectations. And if you think about the origin of a lot of localization teams, it's often born out of a problem that companies have where localization is a part-time effort given to somebody in marketing or product, or localization is dispersed across a company. And they want to consolidate it. They want to have a center of excellence so they can focus on craft, expertise, and efficiency. And that makes sense, but that sets it up as a focus of cost and efficiency. And therefore, the localization team strives to deliver excellent quality at global scale, but with an eye on cost and efficiency at all times. And it's very difficult to break out of that mold and to change those expectations. So that's the first common issue. Secondly, is a lot of localization teams are what I would call stuck in the wrong part of the organization. And by wrong part, I mean they might be sitting in finance or IT or legal, where the focus of that department is more on cost and efficiency and scale and vendor management. And while they're all important things, the measure of success in those departments is typically not around growth or profitability or revenue. So again, that doubles down the narrative around what ROI means for localization. And a third aspect I think is the most important is that in many organizations, localization is seen as a cost of doing business. It's almost seen as like the tax of doing business and of selling internationally, rather than a growth enabler. So I think it's incumbent on localization leaders to challenge that convention, to shine a light on what the opportunity is and what localization can become for their organization.
Yeah, Kevin, I think those are all really excellent points. I talk to customers every single day that use Smartling. And the one thing you mentioned, I kind of laughed to myself where you said, sometimes localization is living in product, sometimes it's living in marketing, sometimes it's living somewhere else. If I started listing the number of different job titles that myself and the CSMs at Smartling talk to every day, that list would be quite long. And what happens there is if localization isn't the number one priority of where localization lives, it becomes really difficult to communicate, right? So is the leader that is spearheading the department that localization lives in, are they really concerned with making sure localization gets the shine that localization deserves, right? We're definitely going to dig deeper into all of this, so I won't go totally off right now. But I think everybody here, everybody who's watching this has probably experienced that within their organization, and really finding that right person, the person who does care, the person who's going to enable localization to get the shine that it does is super, super critical in getting things right.
Yeah, completely agree.
Great. Well, I think you guys set up kind of the issues that are facing teams that are trying to prove the ROI of localization, but that should not deter us, right? There should still be an effort to make that known. So Ryan, talk a little bit about kind of like why should teams prioritize these efforts, even though it's hard to do? What are the risks if they don't prove this ROI?
Yeah, well, the first reason why is you're working hard. You're doing great work and you're doing something important. So why not show off a little bit? I think in this day and age, there's so much noise, so much information that's always available and always at everybody's fingertips. It's really hard to find that needle in the haystack or provide that needle in the haystack saying, hey, look at what we're doing over here. What we're doing is really growing something great. Because localization, Kevin just mentioned, localization is sometimes looked at as a tax, right? But localization is paramount to so many organizations. Whether it's something fun and you're communicating maybe in a video game and you want to make the menus accessible to somebody in Barcelona. I see a hi from Barcelona in the chat. Or maybe you're providing medical information. You want to make sure that people understand a medicine they're putting in their body. Localization can become this profound tool, but it can also drive a lot of growth. A lot of what I focus on is communicating ROI, communicating value, and a lot of times that comes down to being able to measure dollars and cents. And what localization naturally is a growth driver within the organization. And I would say most companies, there are companies that don't want this, but most companies, what they're looking at year over year is how do I grow? How do I get bigger? How do I expand? And localization can really be a propeller for those efforts.
Yeah, what I would add to that, Ryan, as well, completely agree, is that often I'm talking to localization leaders and they feel they have to justify their team's existence to some degree. They have to explain what they're doing and they have to make sure they account for every dollar that's well spent. And I think there's a much better story you can tell. There's a positive, forward-looking story for the company. You can actually point to the untapped potential that exists in global growth. And I think a localization team is so well positioned to tell that story and to move out of this defensive posture or this case of trying to justify why you're there. And you should, if you notice, product team will never justify why they are there. They will just assert themselves in the position of delivering value to the company. And I think any international or localization team needs to take that approach.
Right.
Great. So I'm going to quickly share some visuals here, but Kevin, you talked about asserting why you're there. So what are some of the key data points companies should track, and specifically localization teams or people responsible for localization, in order to prove their ROI? And is there a magic equation that you're going to share with us today to calculate that, or is it a little more ambiguous?
Yeah, I wish there was. No, the short answer is there's no magic formula to this. And I would go further than that. I would say I would encourage people not to create a new metric or a new magic formula, because nobody's going to understand that. It's already challenging enough if you try to present senior leadership with a cost per word metric, and because that's just not understandable in senior parts of the organization. So what's far better is if you look at the numbers that are reported out at your town hall meeting or in your company earnings report, or what are in the OKR goals for the year for your division, and think, what are your leaders talking about? How do they measure success? Is it in ARR growth? Is it in market share? Is it in customer satisfaction? Is it in NPS? When you find out which of those metrics are most valuable to your company and in your department even better, then it's a case of identifying which of these are best aligned to localization and which ones should we align ourselves with and contribute towards. So if you're in marketing, that might be around some marketing metrics around growth. If you're in a customer success organization, it might be NPS or customer satisfaction numbers globally. And when you start identifying these metrics and you start speaking the same language as the leaders are speaking, then all of a sudden you can take your seat at the table and talk about how the numbers are trending in the right direction and how localization can contribute to further growth in that direction, for sure.
Definitely. I think in localization, it's a little bit of a world that it's a unique world. Let me put that way. And we have all these metrics, all these data points, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what does the organization care about? Now, we are measuring things every single day. We are talking about things that are important to us. the folks who are localization centric, and turnaround time, super important to us. The amount of time content spends in a workflow step, super important to us. But at the end of the day, what leadership might care about is, hey, once these words get translated, how does that help me with my CSAT score? Am I seeing support tickets answered more quickly because my users have their information in French? So being attentive during, like Kevin said, during those town halls, looking at earnings calls, transcripts, and gaining that respect within your organization as you speak the language of the organization is the best way to reposition yourself as a value driver. Hey, NPS went up tenfold in Germany, and it's probably not a coincidence that we just launched this German content hub that allows users to go in and quickly empower themselves to get answers. That's a conversation that I love to hear my customers bring back internally, and that's where you see the reinvestment in localization. Hey, I see what's going on here. Maybe I should learn more about that because that's really driving value for our company.
Yeah, I love this connection to not just localization, but the departments that you're supporting, whether that be a marketing or product. Obviously, though, we all know there are other aspects to ROI, in particular, things like cost. So Ryan, can you talk a little bit about sort of what are the other metrics that may be relevant or tracked and should be prioritized as well?
Yeah, so this is getting a little bit into some of those localization specific metrics, especially when you think about the world that I live in as a member of the customer success team at Smartling. So when organizations are spending money with an LSP, with a TMS provider, what they're thinking about, or excuse me, not the localization team, what leadership is thinking about, what they're seeing is, hey, here's a vendor we're cutting a check to. Here's this bill every month for translation. What exactly am I spending money on? What is the value of this software? So what Kevin showed you were a lot of metrics that were around growth, around customer satisfaction, around product usability. But we also want to make sure that our localization teams are set up with the right tooling, and we are also using those tools in the right way to drive down what would be an even higher expense. Because you can really quickly go from hey, we're spending a few $1,000s on this, let's see what happens, to what leadership might view as a money pit if you're not positioning this the right way. So Cassie, your question was, what should we look at in that regard? You know, I mentioned turnaround time and how a TMS might accelerate content moving through a workflow. Instead of talking about time spent in workflow step, let's put it in the terms that our CMO would understand. Hey, we allowed for the most recent product launch to happen in Mexico within 24 hours of the launch in the United States. I actually worked with a customer on that last week, which is why it's top of mind. And they said this was our biggest launch in 10 years, and we have never launched a product within 24 hours to all of our geos. Imagine the value that your CMO, your leadership is thinking about when they see that reduction in time to launch in each of your different markets. So being able to take the metrics you have in localization and connect them that way, whether it be TM savings, not calling them TM savings, call them reuse savings, right? We're reusing the translations we already paid for. Getting creative there. Kevin, not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's great to link the efficiency and the effectiveness of localization to the business objectives. So the example you gave is perfect. Another one I would add is often localization feels like a black box to the rest of the organization or to senior leaders. And so in this black box, it can be hard to interface with it and to understand, what is it doing for me? How can I leverage this? And so, well, what the organization often cares about is, I want to enter a new market, and what is the cost of entering a new market? And that can feel very opaque. It can feel hard to get your head around. Well, if the localization team can articulate the overhead that's needed, which might be very low because you're so efficient at delivering this highly tuned localization machine, you can deliver a new market entry in the following way with the following level of quality at a following cost, then that's highly strategic value you can add to your company. You can say, well, if you're thinking about going into this new territory, here's how you can enable localization at this cost point or at this cost point, and here are the options. Bringing options to your management team, that's enormously effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It takes something that could otherwise be scary and makes it predictable. And we spoke earlier in the first and second prompts. Hey, how do you position yourself as a value add to your organization when leadership is sitting there trying to make these strategic decisions and they go, oh, Kevin from localization, he could take care of this. Let me send it over to him. I know he's my go-to guy. I mean, what speaks to localization's value more than that, right?
Completely.
Awesome. Well, you guys are already kind of getting into this topic a bit, but I want to dig a little bit more into how you can effectively communicate with leadership, and in particular, the different leaders within your organization and what they might want to hear. So I think we'll start off briefly with just a quick look at kind of what you might get from one of your vendors. And in fact, this is what we share in a QBR on an ROI slide. And this is obviously very cost focused. This is about Smartling's ROI, and these are made up numbers, obviously. But how do you translate this and find, hey, should this work for one audience and what should I think about for other audiences? So Kevin, can you talk a little bit about where you might use cost-centric messages and where you might want to focus on something else?
Absolutely. I think there's a few ways you want to look at this. So if you're having a QBR with your service provider and you're paying attention to how efficient your localization machine is and how you're growing strategically, then being able to tell that story internally is really important. Rather than just showcase the facts and figures, actually build a narrative around it. And what's nice about this type of executive summary is that it includes a little bit of everything. It includes some of the initiatives around technology improvement. It includes the key accomplishments that link to some of the initiatives that Ryan mentioned around reducing time to market, which your leaders will care about, and then showing some of the easier to understand metrics that are still efficiency focused. So I think you can tell an efficiency story to begin with, which explains we're taking care of this really well. You can trust us. We have it taken care of. We are working to continuously improve our focus. And now we can do more beyond that. So I think it's not a case of forget this. This is crucial to demonstrate your credentials and to keep on top of what might be a large expense for your organization. You need to prove this out for sure. But I think it's a leaping off point to then do more.
Yeah, I'd add on to that. One thing we keep talking about is who cares and what they care about, right? Delivering the right message to the right people. And as a localization manager or somebody who is tasked with localization, one of the most important things is to keep a clear line of communication with your vendors and with your CSMs, maybe your Smartling CSM. The best results that we see with our customers is when we understand what the North Star goal is. So if your organization is not keying in on CSAT, for example, right? The second bullet point under key accomplishments is around CSAT. Let your CSM know, let your vendor manager know what that key accomplishment would be for your organization. Let your vendors do the work for you, right? You don't have to go back and dig through things. Let us tee you up nicely. And then instead of delivering a 25 slide deck or an Excel sheet that leadership has to go through or your manager has to go through, everything can be summed up in a summary page. And then if they want to dive deeper, you'd be able to provide the details as well. So it's a really nice package, a little gift that you can leave on the right people's doorsteps here.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say a lot of localization teams, they're typically understaffed, right? They have far too much work for what they're expected to deliver. So every day they're firefighting and they're trying to just get their job done. So it can be very difficult to step out of that environment and think strategically or think about what else you can do for an organization when it feels like you're already overworked. So when you're dealing with all of the requests that come your way in a localization team, and every single department is asking you to do different things, it can be useful every now and again to stop and ask some of these senior leaders, what are your goals? What are the things you care about? And how can I help you with that? What are the things you're not asking me to do that we could think about? So, if a marketing team actually cares about getting new leads for their different territories, or if they care about improved conversion rates or improved time on a website, but that might be different from the requests they're making of you every week, then that can be a good conversation opener to figure out, well, what are the different things we could do for you that we're not doing today, other than our straightforward requests. So thinking more in terms of delivering a different type of value is a great way to begin that conversation.
Right. And I know we talked one way about finding those stats is to look at a company dashboard, for example. So you want to talk a little bit about kind of this, Kevin, and how to connect your initiatives with a company dashboard.
Yeah, so most company dashboards I've seen, they resemble this, so they have numbers that are a little bit like this, but they typically will be either global numbers or they will be parsed out by region. So it might be Americas, Asia Pacific, it might be EMEA, and so on. And I would say the first step is always to create an international dashboard that is a replica of that, but broken down by market, and identify the priority markets that your company cares about. And you might quickly find that it's hard to agree on those. Sales might think one set of markets is a priority, marketing might think another, user research might think another. This is quite a common scenario. And I think it's a really useful exercise to try to get an agreement with, do we know what our priority markets are? Are we tracking those numbers? And do we know what's happening every month or every quarter in Brazil? If Brazil is one of our target markets, do we know what's happening with sales, with retention, with churn, with customer success and satisfaction in this market? Are we paying attention to it? And once you can identify that on a dashboard, and you're looking at these numbers that are very commonplace and easy to understand, then you have a starting point for a conversation, a starting point for troubleshooting. And very quickly, if you're looking at satisfaction in Brazil month after month, and it starts to dip, you're going to open the door to see, well, what can we do about this? Why is this happening? Maybe our localization or our international team can help us out here.
I'm happy you said that. I was just going to mention, both in the executive summary and in this company dashboard, there's a lot of positivity, right? There's a lot of upward trends, good numbers, good savings. What I also love about dashboard summaries and taking a step back from the day-to-day tasks is being able to identify where to focus because things are not going in the right direction. Whether that's a specific region, whether it's maybe brand sentiment is dipping. Why is that happening? Is something going on social media? What is Gen Z saying on TikTok nowadays? Right? It allows you to hone in on whatever might be the area that needs a little bit more support, and we can figure out how localization can help with that. So I'm happy you mentioned that at the end there.
Great. Well, you know us, Ryan, on marketing, we always want to be positive. So thanks for calling that out. All right. Moving on to one of our last topics is around, we talked a lot about communicating effectively. What are some ways that you can know if you're being successful with communicating effectively? And, how can you see that localization is being valued as a driver for growth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cassie. So I think the obvious ones and the eventual goals are things like increase headcount, shout outs in all hands, maybe an email celebrating a win, a press release about a launch, things along those lines. But you can also look under the hood at other public facing pieces of information. So there are a few quotes from earnings calls over the past couple of years from brand names that everybody knows. I also did a little bit of look back at a couple of customers that we work with. One thing that I like to do before meeting with a customer is take a look at their earnings call transcript if they are a public facing company. So we recently had a QBR with a large organization, and I don't read through the whole thing. I'm not spending my entire day reading earnings call transcripts. I did a little Command F and I just typed in global. Global was mentioned 6 times on this earning call. And then I decided to go for one other keyword, and that keyword was international. Between global and international, there were 26 mentions of those 2 terms on this company's earnings call. Just shows the value that global expansion and in turn localization is providing to this company. And then the other area I just talked about, finding that focus area, what's going on with sentiment dropping. The CEO of this organization, they said, hey, we're lagging behind our peers in our shape of our audience. Our peers typically have X% international. We're only at about 50%, right? And the very next sentence, this is how important localization is becoming to organizations. The very next sentence, that CEO said, the way we will bridge that gap is by using machine translation. Now, I could not imagine a world 8 years ago where machine translation is being brought up on an earnings call for a major public company. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to see examples of it. But I think what that indicates to me is that the message from the localization department at that company is being spread correctly internally. They understand now what is driving the spend down or what is keeping the spend flat while allowing for an explosion of content. So I think those are all really good examples of recognition, public recognition from companies here.
Yeah, it's actually a really nice starting point for localization teams that are not quite sure of the landscape or how pervasive the international DNA is in their companies to go, as you suggest, look at the earnings report and see, well, to what extent is international or localization or global talked about? And you might see that it's been talked about in terms of sales opportunities. So we're getting new logos in EMEA, or we're expanding the sales team in APAC. And if you see that, then I would suggest that's a hint that there's potential there for doing more, or that's a good starting point. It's maybe not as good as some of the examples in this page, which are really impressive in how they push localization and growth in the same language. And they've clearly seen localization as a true growth driver. Not too many companies have reached that point, but that's, I think, the pinnacle. That's where you need to get to. But I think you want to look out for opportunities to see, how is my company advancing internationally and how much is it important to them? And then you find a way to navigate that and build a bridge from localization to that.
Awesome. All right, last question before we open it up the floor for Q&A. So make sure you get your questions in on the Q&A. But Kevin, what should you do if you find yourself maybe not being seen as this growth or value center, but instead being viewed internally as a cost center? How can people turn that around for themselves?
There is so much you can do. And I would say start small. Don't expect you can change this overnight, but start small. Have a couple of little conversations with your stakeholders that are outside of the everyday business of a request. Ask them about their goals, like we mentioned earlier. Ask how they're trending towards their goals for the quarter or the year, and how is it going in terms of a key region for them or a key market for them. And say, well, maybe I could help you with some of those problems. Find ways of building an alliance with some of the stakeholders you have that care a lot about international. And when you build more of these alliances, you get partners and they can advocate for you and they can include you in their planning. I would also look to advocate for the international customer in your organization. So either talk to your sales team or your support team and say, I'd like to learn more about some of our customers internationally. Can I sit in on a sales call or a support call? Can I see what the support issues we're having? Do you know what the customer success and support or customer satisfaction rate is by market? So if you start building this evidence and telling the story of your international business and international customer, you're going to get the attention of senior leadership. You're going to see that you're shining a light on where there might be a missed opportunity or a blind spot. The other thing you can do is audit your product, audit your website or your product experience, and highlight all the friction that exists for your global customers. And that's a great way to start building a case for doing more.
Yeah, I think there are two things I would add to that, and they're pretty much summaries of what we've been talking about for the past 30 minutes or so. One, celebrate wins. If you're not celebrating wins right now, nobody's going to celebrate them for you, right? If you launch a new market, if you have a great release, if you start working on a new language, that's really exciting. Celebrate it. You're doing cool work. Talk about it more, right? And then the last piece to kind of put a button on probably everything Kevin and I have said and talked about over the past 30 minutes, tell the right story to the right people. If you're being viewed as a cost center and you're trying to work your way out of it, how are you positioning yourself and who are you positioning yourself to? And be critical of yourself. Don't just say, oh, I'm talking to this person. They have a C in their job title, so they're the right person to talk to. Localization has fit into so many different parts of so many companies I've worked with. There's never a one size fits all solution to localization, and it's a challenge and it's hard and it's tough to step back and go, hey, I'm being viewed in a negative light right now. What am I maybe not doing right? So ask yourself that question and then work internally to figure out where you should position yourself and how you can position yourself and connect all the dots. So like we said, speak the language of your business, speak the language of the person that you're communicating with, and you'll be able to get yourself in the right framework for your organization. So yeah, those would be the two additions for me.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for that. It was super helpful and informative. I do have a couple questions that I wanted to ask from the audience before we close it out. So one is just about, creating a cadence of reporting. How often should you be evaluating your performance and kind of sharing that with the organization?
My thought on this is you want to align with the cadence of how often your marketing team, your product team, your sales team are reporting. So, find the typical cadence, whether that's monthly or quarterly, and report alongside that and make that a standard way to report international performance or localization ROI. I think annual is the obvious one to do. And that's probably a good way to wrap up. But I think folding in with quarterly performance is probably a good way to do it, because that's how a lot of companies will think about performance. But if you're, say, a product-led growth company, monthly might be good, because on a monthly basis, you've got a clean metrics to track from one to the other. So just like we mentioned, following your company metrics, follow your company cadence. Don't invent something different. Follow how the rest of your company reports and shares this information, and take your seat at that table.
Yeah, take your seat at the table. At Smartling, to give you a look behind the scenes, we have a monthly all hands, right? And if I were, as director of customer success, we speak at the all hands. We give an update on our company's performance. If you're in a company that has a similar all hands and localization isn't currently included, ask. Right? Say, hey, do you mind if I take 2 minutes, just give an update on what we've been working on and present those key metrics within the organization. I would also say that is communicating it within your organization internally. As a team, you need to be looking every week, every day, and make sure you're iterating and getting things right. So driving towards that North Star and working backwards to figure out what adds up to the company objectives is something that needs to happen every day, every hour, every conversation you have.
Great. All right. One final question here. You guys talked a bit about finding sort of those key stakeholders or advocates within the organization and kind of picking their brain about what their goals are. Where should we look for people like that? Is it always going to be the head of the department? What type of people should we be looking towards to both advocate for localization and also to kind of provide feedback on what the organization is focused on?
Yeah. That's not an easy answer. I don't know if you're familiar with the children's book, Are You My Mother? but it's about a little duckling who goes around town. He lost his mother, and he asks everybody there, "Hey, are you my mother? Are you my mother?" I think that's basically the entire book. In localization, we kind of have to do that. We have to ask around. We can't be shy. We can't sit back and just work in a little siloed environment. Our work in localization impacts quite literally every team within a company. So figuring out what the right metrics are for each different team and each different department is important. And you asked, is it always C-level? Is it always leadership? It is a lot of the time. Leadership's looking for the growth. They're looking at expansion. But a lot of times it's the individual contributors or the managers who you're going to partner up with, and you're going to go, "Hey, Cassie, you care about this. You're in marketing. Let's get you more leads. Let's make you a star of marketing, and I'll help you out with that. And then can you just drop a line about localization in your next big marketing announcement?" So that's how I view it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Ryan. The only thing I would add is to say, once you start moving in that direction and finding people you can make heroes in their own job, then more people are going to come to you to ask for the same. So if you can make that marketing person better in their job, more successful at hitting their quarterly numbers, then somebody in customer support is going to come over and say, "Oh, maybe you could help me with, I'm having difficulty in this particular market. Can you help me with some strategies for improving my customer satisfaction rate here?" And you're going to have somebody there working with you and wanting that input and wanting that expertise. But it's about telling the story. It's about showcasing other people's wins that sit on top of localization or international.
100%.
Great. And I lied. One more question, because I think it's a really interesting one. And we have a couple more minutes, but someone asked around, it's a little tangential, but I think still relevant. They work in an organization that's completely decentralized from a localization perspective, which I think can make ROI very difficult. So are there any tips around, maybe ROI-based tips around how to make the case for centralization from an impact perspective, or even where to begin with that? So I know that's a little tangential, but I think you guys are both probably well positioned to give some tips on that piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on it first. So one thing that we speak about with our Smartling tooling and really any TMS is ROI when it comes to translation memory savings. So when I think about a decentralized environment, if everybody's working in their own tools and doing their own thing, you're really just leaving money on the table or pulling money out of your pocket that shouldn't be pulled out, right? The way we can leverage and share from each other is huge, and it drives cost savings with our TMS tools. The other concept around making a case for centralization of localization is, if you think about an experience you would have with a company. We're speaking English, so I'm assuming the person who asked that is an English speaker. If you go and you speak to somebody in customer support in English, and then you jump to another part of maybe the website and you go to buy the product and it's still in English, but you can just tell that it is not connected in any way, it leads to a really distributed experience. It leads to mistakes by customers or errors or additional support tickets, dissatisfaction. And it also leads to a lack of trust. I know if I was going to buy something and I'm from Staten Island, so if I saw Staten Island English on an e-commerce page, I'd be a little suspicious that something was going on there, especially when somebody was speaking an academic version of English when they were reaching out to support me. So I think lack of trust, leaving money on the table, those are two really big cases there. Kevin, not sure about your thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways you could approach it, and I think you don't need to look at it as in all or nothing. It doesn't need to be decentralized or centralized. There are baby steps you might take that would prove the case. So you might say, well, let's consolidate on our technology, or let's consolidate on our vendor, or on our workflow process, or on our TMs. And if we can start that way, where we have some shared resources and shared expertise, then that's a gain already. And if you can make steps towards that, then you reach a milestone where it seems obvious to centralize the entire division. So that's one approach. The other is to highlight the opportunity cost of not centralizing. So point to all the things you could be doing if you could centralize. So you'll gain some efficiency, but I wouldn't focus purely on cost saving. I would say, if we can gain all this efficiency, look what we can do now. Look at how much better we could invest in these new markets, or marketing campaigns, or tune our product to meet the user needs in different markets. So if you highlight that friction and gap and say, but we have a plan to fix it by centralizing and by consolidating onto this core set of technology and vendors, then we can move on to this. So there's different approaches you could take, but just as like we rarely have decentralized marketing teams anymore, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have decentralized localization teams for most organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm done. No more questions. Thank you both so much for joining. This was a super insightful conversation, and we really appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for joining. You'll see a ticker at the bottom. Our next webinar is in November. It'll be all about Smartling product updates, what we've released and what's coming next year. So for sure, join us for that if you're interested. And we hope you have a great day. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you.